So I hope that most of you know who QUO is, but for those of you who don't, we are a brand strategy agency and creative agency focused on the hospitality industry. And very picking up on Marcus's point, we're all about finding the soul or the story of your brand. So we're, in terms of soft brands and conversion, we're on the other side of the fence, and we often frequently work with owners and operators when they are creating soft brands or when they are positioning hotels to be soft brands or collection brands and facilitating that storytelling process. But before I get into that and a few examples, I'm going to just rewind a little bit, and I apologize if I repeat a little bit of some of what people have said earlier, but I think it's good just to sort of create some clarity around, from a branding point of view, the differences between hard brands, independent brands, and soft brands. So traditionally, obviously, as most people know, there were two choices for owners. You can join a big group and you can be a hard brand, or you can stay independent and have your own brands. And about 30 years ago, 2/3 of hotels were actually independent. Now, less than 40% are independently branded. And one of the main reasons for that is because of the growth of what we're calling soft brands or collection brands. And we'll talk a little bit more in a few seconds about why that's the case. There's been a huge proliferation of soft brands and collection brands over the last, particularly the last 6 to 7 years. This is just a snapshot of some of the major ones from the big groups. We've heard from IHG about Voco, from Accor about M Gallery, and we have brands from Hilton, from Marriott, from Hyatt, and so on. In terms of how that's happened, it's quite interesting to map the growth of the brands. So if we look back in the 90s, we had the luxury collection from Marriott, which was launched in 1992. And really at that point was one of the few collection or soft brands at that time. We then saw in the late 2000s, we had a few more join this group. We had Autograph, M Gallery, and Ascend from Choice. And then suddenly, from 2014 onwards, there was this huge growth in the number of new soft brands and collection brands launching, from the likes of Radisson, QUO, Tribute, Tapestry, Trademark, and so on. So really the last 6 years has seen a massive growth in the number of collection or soft brands, which is really interesting to observe. And what does this mean? So again, we can see a similar trend in the number of rooms. So in terms of collection brands, the number of rooms has really grown again in the last decade or so, and that's just in the room count. What's interesting to see, and I think it's already been pointed out, is most of these brands fall into the luxury, the upscale, or the upper upscale segment. About 80%, in fact, fall in these top 3 tiers. Very few of these soft brands from the big groups, at least, fall in the mid-scale or the economy tiers, which is quite interesting to look at. And I think there's a reason behind that. I think that within the luxury and the upper upscale space, you're seeing increasingly that consumers, travelers want a more differentiated experience. So the brands are responding to that with these more individualized offerings. And even going forward, we don't really see much change in terms of how that will move in terms of the future. If you look at existing chain scale brands and you look at the pipeline, you can see that the growth really still is in the upscale and the upper upscale space, which is interesting. I think we're seeing a few more launches of soft brands in the mid-scale space, but it's only just starting, and maybe that's an area to watch in the future. So why are soft brands so attractive? I think there are a number of reasons why owners gravitate towards soft brands and increasingly are gravitating towards soft brands. I think the first reason is to do with the guest, to do with the changing consumer. We talk a lot about millennials and Generation Z, and they are looking less for the cookie cutter experience, and they're looking more for individuality, for experiential destinations, for one-of-a-kind experiences and moments. They're looking for authenticity, they're looking for locally rooted experiences and culture, and they want to feel connected to that hotel experience. And that often comes through a story, through distinctive design, through interesting F&B experiences. Generally, that is not offered by the big hard brands, and that's why they are gravitating towards more independently managed properties, or at least those that appear to be independent. The second reason I feel that, and actually Sebastian Bazin, the CEO of Accor, sums this up quite well, people used to prefer money well spent, and now they want time well lived. So the second reason, I think, is about the owners. And we're seeing this a lot in Asia, but I think it's a similar story around the world. owners want more flexibility. They want, many owners, particularly in this part of the world, maybe are working with the big groups. They have a hard brand with some of these big groups. As they start to open a second, a third, or fourth property, they're starting to feel like they know their way now. They want a property, a hotel that expresses their individuality a bit more strongly. So that's when they start asking for, okay, what other brands do you have in your portfolio? What else can you offer me where I can keep my identity? I can keep my name. I can keep my vision for this property. We're also seeing, particularly in countries like Vietnam, a number of owners coming from other industries, from other sectors outside hospitality. And the hotel that they're building, they have no experience in hospitality or very little, but they're looking for a hotel as a legacy project. And when it's a legacy project, there's a lot of personality, there's a lot of passion that goes into it. They don't want to be a regular brand. They want to express their personality. They want to express their legacy, even their ego, through this hotel project. And so that's why they fall into these soft brands and why they look for a collection brand. They don't have the time or the means to manage or operate the hotel themselves, but they do want a hotel that talks to who they are as an individual. And of course, as we've seen from the previous panelists, it's a win-win for the big groups. This is a nice quote from a developer at Marriott, where this idea that we want to underbrand the hotels from the traditional Marriott badging so that the independent travelers don't get turned off. But at the same time, we want the pipeline of Marriott Awards customers to be able to find our hotels and to use their points. So I think it's working for the consumer, it's working for the owners, and it's working pretty well for the big groups like Marriott. But it's not easy. Most soft brands require an owner to invest in a significant brand creation process. So it's not a plug and play brand. When you're working with a soft brand, when you sign with a collection brand, it's not just hand over the keys and we'll run it for you. You have, as an owner, you have to invest in creating a story, in creating a brand for your property. And this is where an agency like us, like QUO, steps in. And I think it's important to point out at this point that not all soft brands are the same. From our experience working with different developers and different groups, we can see that there are typically two models of soft brand or collection brand. The first is where it's a brand-led framework with agency facilitation. And what I mean by that is it's a brand where I'm going to give you the example of M Gallery from Accor, where there is a very strong framework in place for how you define yourself as an M Gallery. There's a very specific framework and methodology that you follow. It still requires an agency to support in the execution of that methodology, but there is a very strong framework that us as an agency working with the owner and working with the Accor team have to follow. The second type of soft brand is where there really is no framework or very little framework or guidelines in terms of how you build your brand as a collection. And this is where it's more of a full agency-led process. So this is where we as an agency would get much more involved and maybe use our own methodology, our own frameworks to help guide a hotel owner through the process of identifying their story, their identity, their USPs, their competitive positioning, and so on. An example like that would be, for example, the Hyatt Unbound collection, which as of last year when we worked with them, they did not have a specific framework for an agency to follow, and really it was left to the agency to support the owner through that process, holding their hand all the way. It also varies in terms of the amount of involvement different groups give at different steps in the process. So some brands are very hands-off, some brands are much more hands-on and have to approve every single step. So these are just important things to think about as an owner when you're considering these different soft or collection brands. So I want to talk a little bit about our work with soft brands and take you through very quickly two examples of recent projects where we've worked with owners to identify themselves within a soft brand collection. So we have a proprietary process at QUO, which is where we're forming the brand, what we call the brand culture or the brand DNA, the brand story. And while we don't necessarily follow this exact process for a soft brand, for an M Gallery, for an Unbound collection, for a tribute or a luxury collection offering, we keep this very much in the back of our mind as the way to build and even envisage, bring to life the brand positioning and culture activation of that hotel. So about a year and a half ago, we were approached by a hotel in Vietnam, and they were investing a significant amount of money in property upgrades and expansion in order to become more competitive in their market. They were looking to reposition as a luxury brand from an upper upscale positioning, and they decided to convert from an independent to joining the Hyatt's Unbound collection. They chose the Unbound collection because they didn't want to lose their branding, they didn't want to lose their name or their identity or any of the character or personality they'd built up. But they did need a brand like Hyatt to uplift their positioning, help facilitate the uplifting of that positioning, and just to give them that additional distribution and marketing power. So through their collaboration with Hyatt, we were approached to support them as they went through a storytelling and hotel repositioning process. So as part of this kind of whole upgrading and expansion of their facilities, we had to help understand how they were going to make that transition from upscale to a luxury offering, and what it meant to join the Unbound collection. And it's a complicated process, and it takes a lot of work on all sides, really, to guide a client, to guide an owner through this process. They're very used to running their hotel as it's always been. And I think this is the case with all conversions, but to try and get them into the mindset of what's required to make that positioning shift, but also to conform to the requirements of a collection brand, albeit a soft one at that. The second example, and Andrew will be familiar with this one, is an M Gallery property in Vietnam, which I can name because it's launched, it's live, is the Yen Tu Mountain in the north of Vietnam. This was a process where we as an agency got involved in two angles, really. We were brought in by the owner to brand the entire destination. It's a Buddhist pilgrimage site, which was then turned into this enormous 13th century style village designed by Bill Bensley. So we were branding the entire destination, but we were also brought in by Accor, or by the owner and Accor, to brand the M Gallery property on site. So unlike Hyatt's Unbound collection, as I mentioned earlier, M Gallery has a much more significant framework that we as an agency will follow and help to form the story. It's called the STORM process, the storytelling process. So forming the story of that property, leveraging the assets and the USPs to tell the story, and then bringing that to life through different touch points on the guest journey. And then once we form that story, we can then obviously use that to help shape the identity of the property and bring it to life through different sales, marketing, and operational collateral, video, website, and so on. So it's a very exciting project for us because we get to see it from all sides. We get to see us as an agency working with the owner, working with the different internal stakeholders, but also seeing the processes that come from a big group like Accor in terms of helping to give shape to what is otherwise an independently branded experience. And in this case, it was a very passionate owner. He had a very strong vision, and there was just no way that he could conform to anything other than a soft brand. He needed the soft brand to give him that flexibility to express his identity, his passion, his vision, and to incorporate all these amazing design features from Bill Bensley. So those are just a few examples of soft brands that we've worked with. Thank you very much.